cryptocurrencies. And somewhere around the world, it is close to Halloween time, which is why we thought this would be a good idea to talk about this kind of spooky analogy. So I'm Jessica Levesque. I am the executive director at C4, and we are an educational and nonprofit. We also do certification somewhere and standardization. Around the world, it is close to Halloween time, which is so. Whoa, got to hear myself twice. Lucky you all. So why don't we start with intros? I'm really excited to have Anita from our CBP committee and Dawdu as well with us. So Anita, do you want to start with an introduction?
Yes, thank you, Jessica, and hello, everyone. I'm pleased, honored to be here again in one of your live streams. My name is Anita Posch. I'm a Bitcoin educator. I wrote a book for beginners about Bitcoin. I'm doing a lot of work sharing Bitcoin knowledge in the Global South, especially in Africa. And I have an online learning program, which is called Crack the Orange.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita. Did you mention your book? I was trying to silence myself from, again, yes.
Okay. Yes, it's called Learn Bitcoin.
Yes, it's a great book. So highly recommend if you haven't picked it up. Okay, so next we're going to talk to Dawdu wait, hold on, I'm going to get it. Mahama Amintana, right? Yes. Okay, Dawdu.
Yes. Hi, my name is Dawdu Mahama Amintana. I am a content creator. I do a lot of things around the Bitcoin space, educational purposes, and also I'm also here to be an advocate for, teaching people about Bitcoin and learning about the ecosystem. So thank you, Jessica, for having me on the show.
Thanks for joining. Dawdu is one of those people behind the scenes that helps us create content and is a C4 volunteer. So we have quite a few people that help us with different aspects behind the scenes. And so as a content creator, Dawdu has helped us with some of the articles that we publish on our blog and some other things. So we are a global community, and we could not do this without all of the people who volunteer their time, like Dawdu and Anita. So I really appreciate both of you, both in general for all you do and for being here today. So thanks. Okay, let's get started with zombies and Bitcoin. You might be like, why on earth is this a thing? And so the reason that we're doing this is that Andreas Antonopoulos, who is one of C4's board members, has this idea of Bitcoin being like a zombie of cryptocurrencies, meaning that it just won't die. And you might hear often that Bitcoin is dead, but it is not dead. So let's talk about this quote real quick, and then we'll get into the content. But I always really liked this. I don't know, does any, Dawdu or Anita, do you guys like zombie stuff? Are you a zombie person? No?
No, I'm not so much into it. And also Halloween doesn't have the kind of tradition in Europe as it has in the US. So I'm not so much into it, no.
Dawdu, what about you?
When I was a kid, I was kind of into it just because there was candy involved. But as I've gotten older, like not really as much. And I also feel like Halloween isn't the same anymore. I feel like when I was a kid, it was more like ubiquitous. People were more into it. So, I mean, it's all right, but I'm not like super into it.
Okay, well then I am the enthusiasm for this idea. I love Halloween. I don't like scary movies, but I love zombie stuff. I think it's fascinating. And so when I first heard this quote from Andreas, and he's mentioned it a couple different times in different talks of his, and then it's in the Internet of Money Volume 1 as well. But the idea behind this is that zombies you can't kill them. They don't die. And same thing with Bitcoin. So even after we've heard in the news media that Bitcoin is dead, it keeps on surviving. And the reason it survives and refuses to die is because of all of the characteristics that make up Bitcoin. And it is fascinating. And I think once we go through some of these topics, anyone who's listening will have a better idea of how Bitcoin works. So the actual quote is, I call Bitcoin the internet of money, but perhaps we should call it the zombie of currencies. Even after the double tap, you hear grr behind you. As always, the zombie refuses to die. Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about why it's even necessary to talk about Bitcoin as something that is alive and thriving. And I'm sure you guys have seen in the news that it talks about how it's not. So have you, Anita and Dawdu, both heard of the Bitcoin obituary site?
Yes.
Yes, of course. I don't know how many obituaries we have now. 400 plus, yes.
Yeah, so, and this is just the obituary, only the things that are actually like in the news. It's not just somebody on Twitter saying Bitcoin's dead. This is actual news articles like Forbes or Bloomberg, accredited articles saying things about it being dead. Dawdu, what were you going to say something as well?
Oh no, I was no.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at how long the site's been going on for and what some of the articles have said. So you can see here that there have been so many different stories about this. And Anita and Dawdu, do you guys remember when you first saw something about how Bitcoin was dead in the news media? Or do you see it now?
I don't really remember when I saw it the first time, but it must have been in 2017 immediately. No, basically, I guess it was in 2011 when I heard about Bitcoin the first time, because I seem to have read an article about it and decided, or I thought it's only another form of PayPal. So basically, that wasn't an obituary, but for me, it was dead with that conclusion. And I didn't look into it more back in those days. And in 2017, of course, there was that bull market immediately. Like I came in April 2017, and in November, December, we had that bull market, and there were a lot of stories that said this can't go on forever, and Bitcoin will die afterwards, and things like that. The big bubble, the tulip mania. I'm waiting for the next tulip mania article also.
It's interesting. Oh yeah, please.
For me, I noticed it a lot watching Squawk Box, watching Peter Schiff kind of rant about it and saying that it's going to die. So like that was around like, I think 2020 or so, where like it was during the pandemic. A lot of people were talking about Bitcoin as a hedge for inflation. And a lot of people were jumping out of the box saying that, oh, this isn't going to last. This is a bubble. So I agree with Anita that when you start to see like the cycle starting to ramp up, you see people talking about it more and kind of discrediting it.
Yeah, and it's still going on. Every time there's something in the news about it being dead, I suddenly get a bunch of texts and calls asking, "Are you okay?"
Yes, and also the conflation. Do you say that with things like the FTX fraud, for instance? I did a workshop yesterday and explained that centralized exchanges where you have your Bitcoin in custody are not a good idea. Just look at FTX, and it's the perfect example, actually. And nonetheless, you then have this idea that Bitcoin and FTX is the same. So a lot of people don't know that. And so, yeah, it's always interesting what the media is putting out and that people then believe it.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. And I think a lot of it comes down to misinformation about what Bitcoin is, what it does, how we use it. And so maybe we should jump into talking about why Bitcoin exists, why it was created, and how it is sort of in succession. It didn't just evaporate or, come out of thin air. It was based upon a number of different things. And in addition to the computer science background from it, it also is based on this need for a currency that does something different than other currencies. Anita, I know you talk about this in your book a little bit and in general. Do you want to explain to us this idea of currency and what we've seen in the past?
Yes, sure. So as you said right before, Also, Bitcoin has a long history. It's not, it didn't come out of nowhere in 2009. Also, like in the 70s, we had the first technologies that now are a part of Bitcoin. But talking about the different forms of money we had historically, I guess everyone knows that someday, very, very early in our history, animals were used in exchange for other goods. We were using shells as currency, as money. But I mean, the problem with shells is that there are simply too many of them. So it's not scarce. So the good, the money, the shell as a good has no value because you can get it on every beach. Then how are you transporting shells or maybe other forms of money we had before? They also decay. In war times, like in the Second World War, I can remember my grandmother told me that she was collecting cigarettes to go out and buy food for it. Yeah, and also there were food stamps. They were traded between people, so they were all used as a form of money. But it's not a hard money. It's not a money that is enduring its value. Then there were the ray stones on the island of Palau in Micronesia, I think. And the ray stones were big, like a circle, like a ring, stones that were carved out of the stones on another island. So there had to be put in a lot of work. We can call it was proof of work, basically, that people did there. So they had to carve the stones out of the big stones. So, and then they transported it with a canoe for hours or days to the small island where they were living. And so these stones had scarcity and they had a value because there was a lot of work put into to produce them. And then these stones were put somewhere on the island, and the property, so it was said, okay, this is the stone of this family, for instance. So basically, it was a memorized blockchain. So people knew this stone now belongs to family A, and family A could buy something with it from family B. And then the stone, basically the property, so the ownership of the stone changed to family B. So there was a memory, basically a collective memory in the villages, and everyone knew which stone belongs to whom. And that's basically a form of a ledger that we also use now in the blockchain as a public ledger, which is very interesting, I think. And the ray stones lost its value as a money in that moment when the Europeans came and brought in new tools that made carving out the stones much easier. And also the transport was becoming much more easier. And that's how they lost their value and function. And then when we come to today, I mean, the problem with today's money, and that is a quote of Satoshi Nakamoto, he's saying, the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. So what is a fiat currency? Many people believe still that our money is backed by gold. But since 1971, this is not true anymore. So basically, a fiat currency is a currency, a money, that's the US dollar, the euro, whatever, all currencies in the world. They have no inherent value, like many people like to say, in itself. They are basically backed, or basically the US dollar is backed by oil and by the military power of the US that is protecting the oil that is being produced in Saudi Arabia and in the OPEC countries. That's why we call it the petrodollar. But the dominance of the US is crumbling. I mean, still everyone wants to have a US dollar in Zimbabwe, for instance, because people know it retains its value compared to their own fiat currencies. that are being debased by their authoritarian governments who basically steal from the people via inflation, via printing money out of thin air, which they can do because fiat money is not backed by anything. That's the big problem with all our currencies, whereas in Bitcoin, we have this 21 million limit, supply limit, and it's not possible that just a government or a company or somebody who's exceptionally rich can change that. So the scarcity of Bitcoin will always be there because there is this supply limit on 21 million units.
That was amazing, Anita. That was such a good overview. I love it. Thank you for that. One of the points that you talked about was that fiat currency is based on a government currency. So it's created by this central authority. And one of the big differences between this fiat currency and Bitcoin is that there is no central authority. And you might think, well, how is that even possible? And so Dawdu, would you explain to us a little bit about decentralization and what that means in regards to Bitcoin?
Most definitely. And thank you, Anita. That was a great breakdown of some of the core concepts of Bitcoin. So imagine if there was a big, powerful boss in charge of Bitcoin, even though there isn't, that could make decisions about how it works and who can use it. But with Bitcoin, there's no boss. It's like a big group project where everyone has a say. And this means that no one person, organization, or government can control Bitcoin, which makes it resistant to being controlled or shut down. So essentially, the core code is set in cyberspace and still functions without an administrator at the helm of its creation. So decentralization, to make it easy for people to understand, think about regular money, right? It's managed by governments and banks. But with Bitcoin, there's no big bank or government that makes all the rules. So money is made by the people and for the people, and that's what Bitcoin is really a big advocate of. Decentralization means no central authority. Have you ever read like a mystery book where you don't know who the author is, or you're trying to find out who the protagonist is of the book? That's a lot like what Bitcoin is. So no one knows who came up with Bitcoin. There was a synonymous person named Satoshi Nakamoto that came up with it, but we don't know if it's a man, we don't know if it's a woman, we don't know if it's a particular group. And this mystery kind of adds a sense of intrigue and curiosity to the protocol. It also means that no one can take credit or control over Bitcoin. It's like a secret recipe that everyone can use and no one can claim that they own it.
I just need to jump in and say that when you said it's a big group project, I right away had flashback to class projects when not everybody pulls their weight. And it made me think what an incredible community the Bitcoin community is, because it's not like one of those group projects. Everybody who chooses to be involved, and in particular, those who choose to be involved in mining, are doing the things that they need to do. And I guess maybe there are people who choose not to, and they would be the slackers of the group project. But it's really neat to think about it that way, because it's something we've all experienced likely in our life at some point, is creating this group project. And that is what Bitcoin is. It's a group of people that are working together to succeed within what I think is an incredible technology.
Yes,
like
and
that example.
We've seen so many like centralized projects out there that get hacked, or people do nefarious things that kind of control the protocol. That's why a lot of people get burnt with these other tokenized other entities. But because Bitcoin is decentralized, no one can easily shut it down or take it over. And because no one knows who created it, there's a sense of like that mystery, like I said earlier, and it keeps that wonder and people intrigued and interested about, how do we solve this riddle? How do we figure out who the creator is? But then they realize, like, we don't need to know who the creator is. We just need to know that it works, it's secure. And all the people out there that say that Bitcoin won't last, it just keeps going on. And this mysterious superhero that's here to stay is always why I think Bitcoin refuses to die.
Yeah, absolutely. Anita, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, Bitcoin is decentralized. I mean, I'm just repeating a little bit what you just said, but like Bitcoin is decentralized because it's owned and controlled by the people who use it and who own it. When you have it in self-custody, that's also why self-custody is so important. And yes, as you said, Bitcoin is a grassroots project. It was really started by a handful of people who installed the Bitcoin software on their computers, started to run a node. And in the beginning, it was also easily possible to use your own computer at home and mine competitively Bitcoin. And I mean, today, the mining part has changed a lot. Yes. So if you want to mine really a lot of Bitcoin, you need a high number of machines. You need a high investment, basically, in a mining facility. Yeah. But today, it's still possible to do it at home. So there are a lot of people that I know or see online who are sharing their stories about how they are doing home mining and basically are warming their flats and their apartments with mining. And still, anyone who has a computer and reliable internet can install the software and run a node on their own computer and be their own bank and be a full member of the network. There's no permission that you need, and that's also so special. The software is open source, can be downloaded for free, and it's maintained by independent developers who decided to work on it just because also I think they care about Bitcoin and about this technology, and that's what makes it so sympathetic, or like a grassroots movement from the people. And also when we remember in 2017, the block size wars, this was actually all about the size of the blocks in the blockchain. And there were the people who said we need to keep it small because otherwise people in countries or people who don't have good internet bandwidth or high enough bandwidth and speed, they can never be a part of the network. And people wanted that it stays that way, that anyone can become a node. And that was the reason why the hard fork happened in 2017. And even every, I say simple Bitcoin user, and I mean with that, if you're just using it, you have no idea about the technology, but you use a certain wallet because it follows certain rules that you like, then you also are a part of the network and a part of the consensus when the software or the code or the rules are being changed. You can change your wallet because you decide, okay, I don't want to go with that fork. I don't want to follow that code. And the Bitcoin blockchain is a so-called open blockchain. There's also this difference. A lot of people don't know that because it's permissionless, open source, transparent, public, and therefore censorship resistant. So that means that the transactions cannot be changed by a centralized entity or a third party because there is no third party. And that's the big difference to so-called private blockchains. These are things like coins from banks, or a CBDC is definitely a private blockchain by the government. So there are centralized institutions or foundations. With other cryptocurrencies, they have foundations. And that means also that often the code is closed source. So no one could really check, is there a bug? What are they really doing with the money? And also, no one knows if transactions are being altered, which you can't do on Bitcoin, but you can do in a private blockchain. And so I think that's also important. An important part of the decentralized, centralized discussion is also public or open blockchain.
Yeah, and I really like that when you use the phrase owned by the people who use it. And that is what an open blockchain really is. It is owned by everyone who decides to be a part of that. And this openness and the ability for anyone to participate in it is what leads it to be censorship resistant, which you touched on a bit, Anita. And Dawdu, do you want to expand on that a bit about this censorship resistance? element of Bitcoin.
Yes, most definitely. Anita hit a lot of the main key points, but to make it easy for people to understand if they're not like super technical, Bitcoin is censorship resistant due to having no gatekeeper. In many systems, there's a gatekeeper who decides who's in and who's out. But with Bitcoin, there's no bouncer at the door per se. No one person or group gets to say, you can't use Bitcoin. It ensures that your transactions are yours and yours only via a public address. No one can say you can't do that. It's like having your own secret code that no one can break. So when we say Bitcoin is censorship resistant, we mean it's like a super inclusive club where everyone is welcome, but no one can kick you out of it or tell you you can or can't do something in it. Of course, there is, protocols in place if you're a core developer where if you're pushing something up into the network, it has to go through consensus, which means that you have to have a group vote saying that there's some value to the network if you create this particular part of code. But for the most part, if you don't agree with it, you just don't update your node like Anita said, and you can kind of run things on your own, and that goes into forks and other things. But to make this simple for people to understand, because Bitcoin is censorship resistant, it levels the playing field for everyone. And that's one of the things that makes Bitcoin really special.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that Bitcoin is censorship resistant is because it runs all over the world. And so the way that the Bitcoin protocol works is that there are nodes, which is basically computers running software of the Bitcoin protocol all around the world. And these nodes validate, they broadcast, they process, they post all of these Bitcoin transactions and they store it. And so when we talk about this network of nodes, it's kind of an abstract idea, as many things in computer science are, but the idea of it is very similar to the internet. The internet isn't just this one thing that you have access to. It's many, many computers, this whole network that comes together. So if you're watching this and you're streaming this, you're connected to something that's connected to something that's connected to something that's connected to my computer that's putting this out, and we're sending things back and forth to each other. It's the exact same thing with Bitcoin. It's a network of nodes that come together to process and agree to what the state of the network should be. And then this is pushed out for everyone to see. And this complex idea, if you break it down like that, feels a little bit more simple. And I think if you're interested in understanding how Bitcoin works, this is a core concept. You don't need to understand all of this to use Bitcoin. There is a difference between understanding the technology and using it. For example, you can use your credit card, but you don't need to understand exactly how it works. But for those of us that have curious minds, or we want to really understand the principles of it, this is why we're doing this talk today, and why C4 does educational materials, and why we have our certified Bitcoin professional exam, so that people are able to prove that they do understand the underpinnings of the technology. And one of the things that I brought up is that these transactions are put onto the blockchain. And Anita, you touched on this earlier, and it's fascinating. And I'm wondering if you can get into it a little bit more. This idea that anyone can use the Bitcoin blockchain and anybody can make transactions on it. So I'm able to send to you, you can send to Dawdu, he can send to me. What does this look like when we're talking about public transactions, and how is this different than if we were to send money via the bank?
Yeah, so you of all know the best who called it the Internet of Money. That was Andreas Antonopoulos. And that's basically what Bitcoin is. It's a protocol, it's a software, it's a standard on which value is exchanged throughout the world in a network of nodes. And the beautiful thing about that is that, as you say, anyone can be a part of it. You don't need an ID. It's permissionless. And this is also the reason why many authoritarian leaders don't want to have Bitcoin, because it's basically the exit, the alternative for people under authoritarian rulers to gain financial freedom. And Bitcoin is public and the blockchain is also public. There are different reasons for that. And since the first block, the so-called Genesis block in 2009, every transaction has been recorded on the blockchain in the chronological correct order. And this is also important to maintain the maximum supply of Bitcoin, because if the blockchain were not transparent, we could not basically have a proof of that there have not been more Bitcoin mined than they should. And every transaction is public. That means if you, for instance, share your Bitcoin address on the internet, someone else could look it up in a so-called block explorer and see how many money, how many Bitcoin you have received and how much you have spent. And there is no third party. Yes, it's exactly a transaction between two peers. And that was also Satoshi Nakamoto's big breakthrough with the Bitcoin blockchain, that they solved the double spending problem. And the blockchain, the public ledger, is a core element of solving that problem. Just to explain what this double spending problem is. Up until Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin blockchain, people have not found a solution for digital files. I mean, Bitcoin is also basically a digital file, you could say, like a PDF. Yeah, you can send one PDF to 1,000 people at no cost and tell them all that's the original. But you can't do that with Bitcoin. You can't forge it. And anyone trying to do that would be removed from the network for a short while. And so Satoshi Nakamoto also found a decentralized way to issue money. That was also something that people, all the cypherpunks before them, didn't find. And so, yes, the blockchain is a core part of it, but it's not the only part, let me say that makes the magic and Bitcoin work as it does, as many people believe.
Yeah, and it is pretty cool how we don't need that central authority in the middle of it. We don't need to have someone say, yeah, you can do this, or you can't do this. There's no one to stop those transactions. It really is up to us to continue to keep the technology alive, which is why it's not going to die. And anybody can send and receive text messages or not text messages. Well, I guess text messages too, but Bitcoin transactions. So why don't we talk a little bit about how we can actually see these transactions online, and how, if I was to use a wallet, so this example of this picture would be like me having Bitcoin on my phone wallet, and it's not actually in there. The computer code stores it so that it's listed on all these computers everywhere, how much I have. And if I chose to send it to Dawdu, you would then be able to see this on the public ledger online. And this is an example of a blockchain explorer. And Dawdu, do you want to explain a little bit about what is public within the transaction history that is shown on the blockchain ledger?
Yes. When it comes to Bitcoin transactions, there's a little bit of a balancing act between privacy and transparency. So public addresses are like digital mailing addresses that you can see from the sender and the receiver. For example, like you see on this slide, you see these digits here, these long digits for the Bitcoin transaction. And these long string of letters and numbers that uniquely identify each party in each transaction is what you called a public address. So anyone can see which addresses are involved in the transaction. The exact amount of Bitcoin that is sent is also public. This is important for verifying that the transaction took place and for keeping track of how much Bitcoin is in circulation. The date and time, which was what we call a timestamp, is when the transaction occurred, is recorded. So this helps in keeping a chronological order of all the transactions on the blockchain. When you send Bitcoin, you usually pay a small fee to the miners who process this transaction. This fee is also recorded and can be seen by anyone. But for people that might be flummoxed on exactly the difference between public and private, what is not public on the blockchain is the addresses where your personal information is compromised. For example, your identity, the entities behind the address are not public. So when you see that an address is out there being sent by Bitcoin publicly, you don't have to worry about your name, your email address, your address, your private address being kind of released onto the blockchain. So any of those personal details of the parties involved, like names or addresses, like I said earlier, are not recorded on the blockchain.
May I say something? Dawdu, great
No.
explanation.
No, I had you here to not say anything.
Great explanation, Dawdu. Thank you. I only want to add, because it sounded a little bit as if name and residence address were apart and they are just not public. I'm sure you wanted to say something different. They are not even recorded. You don't even need to give it to anyone to use Bitcoin. That's the great thing about Bitcoin. So you don't need an ID. You don't need an email address. You can just start using it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Anita, for that. And also the reason why I broke it down that way is because I'm looking at it from the aspect of someone that has no idea about Bitcoin, and they're looking at it from a traditional financial perspective where they think that they have to do KYC and they think that they have to add their name and their address to get onboarded into Bitcoin. So thank you, Anita, for kind of highlighting that point.
Well, that's a good point, that there are two different ways to use Bitcoin. You can use a centralized exchange in which you are providing your information, KYC, know your customer. So you would provide your information and perhaps connect your bank account to it to purchase Bitcoin, and then it is connected to you. If you have money that you get on a centralized exchange using your name, that is then attached to you. But if Anita was to be a miner and she was to, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but get some Bitcoin rewards from mining and send it to me, and then I send it to Dawdu, there is no record then of it because I got the Bitcoin in a way that wasn't distributed from this centralized place. So I think this is great that you both focused on this, because there are two different ways to go about doing this. So it is anonymous, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, depending on if you purchase from an account. And the only way then that you can actually tell is by tracing through the blockchain transactions using a blockchain explorer. So yeah, I think that was a great way for us to be able to explain that there's both things, and it really depends on how you go about doing this. But within the explorer, it doesn't say like Dawdu just sent this. You'd have to go through and do the kind of track it. And all of this is done through math. And this is, I think, one of the most important aspects of why Bitcoin isn't going to die, is that we use math to make this happen. And by we, I don't mean me, because math is not my strong suit. But people that are excellent at math, they are using math to make sure that this happens behind the scenes. And so what's really going on behind what we see within a blockchain explorer or on our phone when we send a transaction is that there's something called the consensus algorithm. And an algorithm is simply a set of steps that are used to set off a specific task. So in computer speak, it just basically says, do this, and then this is going to happen. But the only way that that's going to happen is if the group, this community that we talked about, this group project, comes together and agrees that that is the answer to this math problem. And once that happens, then the transaction is put into the blockchain. That's kind of a simplified explanation of it. But what happens behind the scenes with this math is called mining. And we've talked a little bit about that, but mining is not, a person that is like digging. It is a computer that is doing something, and a person can be the one that sets up this mining operation, or you can be a part of it in different ways. But before we get into that, why don't we talk, we're not going to get deep into the math at all, but why don't we talk about what mining is and how it works to secure the network? Dawdu, do you want to jump in?
Yes. So mining, a lot of people hear that word and they think about like digging for gold or something like that. In the Bitcoin protocol, mining is basically how new Bitcoin are entered into circulation on the blockchain. So Bitcoin mining is this intriguing process that involves validating the information on the blockchain block, and miners generate and solve this cryptographic math problem that must meet like certain criteria. Once the math problem is solved, the miner or miners, because this can be multiple miners all chasing this one particular cryptographic math problem, once they accomplish this feat of actually solving the equation, they're awarded with some Bitcoin or Satoshis, and their fee is also tacked onto it for their hard work of actually mining for the Bitcoin, which is kind of a laborious process. It requires these super powerful computers that their only job is to solve this math problem on the blockchain. It doesn't have a monitor, it doesn't have a keyboard. It's literally a computer that is just based on just mining for Bitcoin. So imagine there's like a lot of miners in a big race and they're all trying to solve a puzzle, but this isn't just any puzzle. This is like a super hard math problem. The first miner to solve it or to get a new block to the Bitcoin blockchain and secure the network, they get rewarded with Satoshis or a portion of a Bitcoin.
And the reason we just had a Sudoku puzzle example on the slides is because you can explain it as a bunch of people trying to compete to finish the Sudoku puzzle first. But it'd be many, many Sudoku puzzles. And I didn't come up with this analogy. Again, this is one of Andreas Antonopoulos's. But I remember actually where I was for the first time. I think this was in 2016, maybe, or I think 2016. I was listening to a talk and I was kind of zoning out. And then I heard this example explaining how Bitcoin was like Sudoku. And I was like, wait, what? And then once it was explained that it's all these people competing, and by people, I mean computers, these miners, competing to do this massive Sudoku puzzle, and whoever solves it first, and then everyone agrees on it, that is how something reaches consensus and is validated. And go ahead, Anita.
I would like to add something. So why mining is important. I'm not sure if Dawdu wants to speak to that, but sure. I just want to say mining secures the whole blockchain, the whole value of the Bitcoin network. And that's why it's so important, because, you know, many people say proof of work mining wastes energy. But we need also some sort of work put into the creation, into the issuance of Bitcoin, because otherwise anyone could do it and then it wouldn't have any value. And I think these are two very important reasons, and also to decentralize the issuance of new Bitcoin, because the Sudoku and the puzzle is basically solved by many miners at the same time, but it's it's how do you call it, by chance. So who wins? No one knows who wins the next block. And this is also important for the neutrality in a way, and the that the network is not cannot be influenced by any big whales or something.
Yes, and I just want to add on to one thing Anita said too. Each new block, they're added every 10 minutes, and this keeps everything running smoothly and ensures that the transactions that are getting processed in a timely manner, that 10-minute increment can never be changed or altered. And that's what also keeps the network secure, like Anita was mentioning. And for the reward portion of it, that's the exciting part for miners, where when they successfully mine a block, they get a special prize, which is called a block reward. And it's like getting a gold medal in a race, for example. So mining for Bitcoin is extremely essential to the protocol, because it secures the network, it creates more blocks on the blockchain, and it actually allows the protocol to be secure and to move very effortlessly and essentially.
And this decentralized issuance is a huge part of, kind of circling back to where we started. You can't just say, here's some new Bitcoin because we made a mistake and didn't issue enough or issued too much, and inflation, yada, yada. It is what it is. It exists as it exists because of math. So there's no way for someone to just go in and be like, oh, I'm going to, dole out some extra Bitcoin because we're having some issues and we need more for this. It is computer programs that make it the protocol it is. And it can't just be, I can't just decide I'm the president of the world. I'm going to make this lovely change that benefits me and it's going to be fantastic. So it's really a unique system set up that can't be altered. And one of the really cool things about mining is that, and Anita, you touched on this, anybody can be a miner. Anyone can either, well, not anyone, I guess you have to have the ability to do so. I should preface that. But if you have the ability, you can either become, buy an ASIC machine for mining, or you can join a mining pool. And that means you're participating in this pool, participating in some way, but you don't necessarily have the software or hardware, at your house or wherever. But there's other ways to do this. And Anita has a unique story about somebody she knows who is a miner. So rather than me talking about this, why don't we have you explain it, Anita?
Yeah, I want to add that there are a lot of scams that are called Bitcoin mining or mining pool. So I'm more speaking about really having the hardware and the software and really mine on your own computer and mine Bitcoin. And as an example, yes, when I was in Zimbabwe, I think last year, I got to know a Zimbabwean who is living in the diaspora, and he has a farm in Zimbabwe, and he runs the farm basically online. And he has some workers there, and it's a chili farm, and he has a solar power infrastructure, so he can generate his own electricity. So basically he had all the devices to have free electricity during the day, and he also has the batteries to store the electricity to mine through the night. And he said to me, I'm a Bitcoiner and I have this farm and I would like to start mining, but can you help me? How can I get to get some ASIC miners, some of these special devices? And then it was funny, around the same time, a guy from the UK or from the US, I don't know exactly because I only knew his username, so not his real name. And he said to me, I have a few ASIC miners that I'm not using anymore. I would like to donate them. And so I connected the two. The miners were sent to Zimbabwe, and the guy put it up and started using his free electricity that he didn't need for the farm because it was excess electricity. And he started mining, and he had days where he told me, that was when the price of Bitcoin was higher than now. But he said he's making like $25 a day with these 6 ASIC miners and the free electricity. And that goes to show that really everyone, yes, with the technical abilities, and yes, with the very, very cheap or even free electricity, can start mining Bitcoin and earning their own fresh Bitcoin to build up some sort of savings or capital. Yeah, and in the big picture, this is a vision for many African countries who have more hydropower than we believe. And if they were to start Bitcoin mining now, they could gain much more independence from other countries where they are very much indebted with the traditional currencies. So mining is actually a very fascinating part of Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. I love these real stories where it's not just this hypothetical, it's someone you actually know and met, and this is really happening. And to see it in real life, I think says a lot about the fact that everyone within this community really cares about how we can work together to make this work. And that is part of why this is the zombie of cryptocurrencies. This is the kind of one that started it all, and all of these different characteristics that come together, including the people that make up this group project, as Dawdu said at the beginning, who have this vested interest and believe in it, putting forth the energy, and both literally the energy in terms of the electricity, but also the energy of communicating with each other, teaching one another how to make this work. And that, I believe, is what really makes this such a strong, unique, revolutionary technology. And then, of course, the math behind it all that comes together to secure the network. And even if we don't understand all of the properties of the math, we can look in and see how this is working on the blockchain explorer. We can practice by sending currency back and forth. And there are a lot of things you can do to be involved in Bitcoin, in the network, in this community, rather than just the really technical side of things, which I think is what makes it so strong, is that people who don't have a background in computer science or math can still use this technology and really be a part of it. What a wonderful thing to be able to participate in. So
yeah, I couldn't say it any better. I just wanted to say thank you for these great closing words, right? And I also would like to add, there are simply too many people involved now. Bitcoin cannot die anymore. I came into the space in 2017, and I mean, it has grown so much. And as you say, we are all very much invested. And I don't mean with money, I mean with our energy and our enthusiasm and our willingness to drive the Bitcoin adoption forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is the zombie of cryptocurrencies. And it is something that isn't going to die because there are so many different aspects of it that have come together, and we're just going to keep moving along. We're going to ignore those rumors that Bitcoin is dead, and keep pushing forward with reminding people that this is about the protocol, not about the investment side of it. This is not about the money. This is about what we can do with this to make the world a better place. And we are lucky that the technology is sound, computationally sound, and that we will continue to see this around for our lifetime. So any closing remarks, Dawdu, that you wanted to say before we go?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to C4, thank you to Anita for having this very insightful conversation. I hope people learned a lot from it. And, you know, you're absolutely right that, you know, Bitcoin cannot die, and the Bitcoin network is pretty much designed to take the money, the control out of the hands of centralized entities and put it back into the hands of the people. And it's like this silent revolution that a lot of people are kind of joining in each and every day. There's so many people involved, so many talented people involved, and I'm just excited and happy that I was able to kind of explain some things about Bitcoin during this live session today.
I so appreciate both of you joining to talk about this technology and how it's changing the world and break it down in a different way than we have in the past. And so thank you for being here. And thank you to everyone who's watching. If you have comments or feedback or ideas for future live streams that you'd like experts to join us to talk about, please let us know in the comments on YouTube or Twitter. And we appreciate you being part of this community, because if you're listening to this, you are part of this Bitcoin community. So thank you. And we'll see you for the next one. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.